Thank you, Dimitri. So I know it's a challenge this time of our day. You're very, very tired, I'm sure. So I really want to invite you, as this title is speaking about engaging with life, to engage with this presentation. So it's not just about sitting there listening to me, but kind of participating in a way. Coming to this conference, I had kind of a shift of intention when I decided what to present. At first it was something very mainstream, kind of my usual research, which is quantitative, very kind of a well-structured. But then I decided this community is about like-minded people. This place I feel at home, I can be exposed, I can be vulnerable, and I can also bring things that are now under progress. So I want to present to you something that I feel has been rather neglected and underrepresented. And for me, it's a very personal topic. It's as a work in progress. It is still something that's been done. So of course there are holes, and I would really love to hear your thoughts and ideas. So I want to dive in. I want to start by noticing the thing we already know, noting that an ample body of research highlights the importance of meaning for personal growth, psychological adjustment to life adversities, trauma and suffering, and of course for human flourishing. We know all of that from extensive research findings. However, much less is known about the implicit processes by which meaning is found or discovered. We know much little about that. Actually, I believe the question that most of us are very concerned with is which processes and mechanisms contribute to a sense of meaning. And what I'm personally interested in, which processes and mechanisms contribute to a sense of meaning in everyday life. Speaking of our natural settings, everyday living, what is it that really creates that sense of meaning? And as Emmy beautifully mentioned that earlier, we are wired to look for connections. We are wired to make sense of the picture. We're kind of evolving pattern recognition machines. We're wired to look for structure. This is a very nice example I found. Some people see this as a drunk octopus wants to fight. So we look for structure and order and coherence almost everywhere we go. And we know that humans strive to make sense of the world. We know that from theory, from, of course, models. In order to flourish, we know that people need to believe that their lives are meaningful and that they're doing something useful, important, and significant. We also know from different theories and different literature reviews that one of the central components of having a sense of meaning in life involves the experience of coherence. Some kind of a coherent whole, a feeling that life makes sense, that all of the dots are connected in some way. And as this little button shows you, the blue button is true and the red button is false, so it's really hard for us to see discrepancies. And we know that also from laboratory studies that we seek and to detect connections, association, and regularities in environments which allow us to adapt to our environments. This is something we all share as creatures. We also know that detecting coherence in the external world can be intentional, but most of it is a product of unconscious processes. For example, when people are confronted with a threat to their personal control, they tend to identify patterns in random displays. We know that in nature, for example. And when we expose people to examples of discrepancy, like we did in the first panel, and this kind of a beautiful example, and coherence in nature and society, it decreases their sense of purpose in life and their willingness to engage in purposeful pursuits and goal-directed actions. So, given that people are seeking coherent connections between themselves and the world, they strive to make sense of their place in the world, perceived discrepancies like this may provoke their efforts to rebuild meaningful connection. And of course, the obvious example is when faced with adversity, suffering, trauma. We know, of course, Park's model of meaning making, right? Then we need to rebuild our shattered worldview and meaning assumptions that have been shattered. But much less is known about unclear threats. Because when we're facing trauma, suffering, adversity, these are clear threats in our surroundings. But we know much less about individual sense-making of uncertainties that are involved in random events or unexpected coincidence. That's something, I kind of looked a lot. Nobody systematically explored that until, hopefully now. So the question that I really was intrigued by, how do people make sense of random and unexpected information and events in their everyday lives in natural settings? What do you see here? A plate of cholesterol? Fries? Sunny side up? Do you see anything else?
Is that apricot?
You see what?
Is it half of peach?
Yeah, most people, yeah, it's actually yogurt, peach and apple. Yeah, but we often tend not to see that, right? We have unintentional bias that we don't really aware of the limits of our attention, and very quickly our brain makes sense and kind of closes the deal. So we're not really open to other options that can be seen in this. Of course, this is just a symbol of our everyday lives. So now I want to invite you to a little exercise. I promised participation, and I hope you'll play along with me, not just listening to me, but also kind of exploring this idea. So I invite you to take a few minutes. You can write it down, you could just reflect on these questions. You can relate to any of these. Have you ever experienced an unexplained coincidence that held a special meaning for you? An occurrence that signified something special. A coincidence which helped you make an important decision you had to take. Can be any of those. So just if you could just reflect for a few minutes for yourself, you can write it down and just kind of track an experience, kind of a quick life review. Can see your processing. Okay, so once you have one, I want to just invite you for a few seconds, to pair up with a person next to you, and of course, whatever comfortable for you, but just very briefly share this experience with that person. And the person listening can really help you try to identify the meaning or the role of this experience or something you take away from this experience. So you can devote a few minutes for that if you're willing. And now it's not the usual participation in conferences, you just mostly listen, but I invite you to participate actively. Okay. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for listening. I can see connection kind of created just from this very brief talk, which is, for me, it's amazing to see. You're not just sitting there listening, but also connecting. Does anyone want to share some insight or something interesting, just even with a word or something you're curious about? It's okay. Yeah.
If I can just use my partner's example, she was talking about play therapy and one workshop that she did, was thinking about in the morning. And it was interesting that I also had that thought in my mind early on in the morning, but I did go for that and did, some of the other sessions. But I just found it a great coincidence that we were sitting at each other, just discussing about the same thoughts.
Nice. Oh, nice coincidence. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Thank you for being brave to share. Anyone else want to say something? Yeah.
One of my colleague that's just stepped out the room he actually mentioned there was an artist who was actually due to go to a different workshop today, completely not here at all, and she travelled 50 miles there, got there, and it had been cancelled. And they said to her, "We're really, really sorry, but we've got a spare ticket for the meaning conference today, and it's just close by, so if you'd like to go to that instead." And she came here, and she just missed the end of like Carol Riff talking. She's an artist, and she went up to Carol Riff afterwards and said, "How can I help? What can I do?" And then Carol Riff said, "Well, you can do something with me, you can work with me." And all of a sudden the artist, tears streaming down her eyes, the synchronicity of actually coming in at the same point and meeting that person. So,
wow. Incredible, thank you. Wow, so when we start to seek these experiences, we see more of them. Some of them very much mundane or something we wouldn't even stop to see, and some of them are really incredible, hard to capture in words. Thank you. So this idea of a causal connection between the external world and our internal world has been coined for the first time by Carl Gustav Jung. He had two very lovely definitions that I really like. Synchronicity is an uncausal principle and can be defined by a meaningful coincidence which appears between a mental state and an event occurring in the external world. And another one, a psychological meaningful connection between an inner event such as thought, image, dream, and one or more external events occurring simultaneously. And I believe some of you know his famous scarab example of a therapy and the difference it made, the transformation it created for his client, sorry. So ever since Jung, who was kind of a very systematically exploring this idea, but ever since then it still remained kind of a mystery. Since Jung introduced this concept for the first time, the notion has gained unique endurance and cultural impact, especially among clinicians. We have so many, accounts of case studies showing the importance of synchronicity experiences for the well-being and coping and with adversity among clients. We have special issues devoted to this specific concept. And we also know kind of a revival lately has been around career counseling, actually. The whole idea of our careers are never developed in the linear path. They are always kind of a very synchronistically, you pick up a phone, you say yes to an offer, something comes up. And this idea, what has been called, I don't have time to really elaborate on that, but what has been called a planned happenstance theory, which is kind of a contradicting concept, planned happenstance, being able to be open to unplanned opportunities but plan for them, has been something that has been researched very much lately around as turning points in one's career in terms of career development theories. Yet, no empirical research on the concept, very systematically concerning and understanding that very in depth. So, research has been sparse and mostly concentrated in this literature of psychotherapy and career development. And despite its very deep roots in our early psychological theory, we hardly have anything that really try to understand how it unfolds, the nature and characteristics of this everyday phenomena. And I like this quote very much. He says, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see." Sometimes in our very fast-paced reality, we hardly stop to see, to notice the unusual event in our everyday surrounding. So just to kind of summarize what we have explored until now, we need a more holistic and systematic exploration due to the rather high estimated frequency of its occurrence among non-clinical populations. We actually know, just as this little exercise showed us, if we had more time, I'm sure you will find more experiences like this. Most of us have experienced this kind of synchronicity, in a way, this kind of correspondence between your inner state and external state. external manifestation in the world. So we know it's pretty, it's something very frequent, and also due to the potential threat that such experiences may pose on individual sense of certainty and control, this is where I began, we need to find structure and order and coherence in our surroundings. And also what has been proven in clinical work, that the possibility that synchronicity awareness may foster well-being by enhancing a sense of meaning in life. So all of these enabled me or triggered me to try as a first step, as part of my attempts, a bigger project that I'm involved with, trying to explore transformative life experiences. We have hundreds of interviews of both trauma and striving around the idea of transformative life experiences. So it's really triggered me, this idea, to explore this further. And as a first step, it was kind of trying to understand how people experience these kind of experiences. And of course, phenomenological research is the natural place to start. So the questions that I really want to understand is, how do participants experience synchronicity in their everyday lives? And what are the nature, characteristics, and possible outcomes of such experiences? So very, very briefly, I believe, as many of you here, that we need to give human face and human voice to these kind of psychological concepts and make them real by really listening to people, by sitting with people and trying to really understand the way they experience the world. So this is based, a very, again, initial model based on face-to-face, in-depth, semi-structured interviews and phenomenological data analysis. The analysis of these interviews yielded a model that I want to present to you today. Of course, it's a tentative model. It's something, again, a work in progress. We're working now on experimental studies as well and quantitative study as well. So this model, which we called REM, some kind of, I'm sure you have many connotations for this REM. The first building block is receptiveness. What we identified among all of these participants coming from different backgrounds, ages, gender, socioeconomic context, they all talked about receptiveness as a precondition to experience synchronicity experiences. Attentiveness, curiosity, flexibility, attunement to novel experiences, which really allow them an open-mindedness to these new opportunities. And I wanted just to share a few voices of those people. For example, I think of it as a flower. A flower opens up in the morning and doesn't know what will happen during the day. Perhaps it will summon a hand of a little child to pick it, or a butterfly to rest upon, or bugs to climb on. It doesn't know what will happen, but it opens up. It doesn't close itself because of that unknowing. I mean, you have to open yourself to the world, to open up to what happens in our surroundings. And another one, speaking about participating in life, you need to participate. I mean, I'm looking for it, anticipating in the sense that I'm always open that it can happen. It's a totally different experience to life when you pay attention. It's like walking in the world in a sense of wonder and magic, rather than merely concrete, materialistic, ordinary reality. You look for connections and get echoes from the world. You see more opportunities. So this is like the precondition of these experiences. The second building block, the E, is the emotion-evoking event. This is the actual event. And of course, it has both objective and subjective qualities within it. This was we saw a wide range of very wide repertoire of different experiences or events. It can be something like physical signs, like goosebumps. I'm sure you've all sometime experienced that. It can be nature, it can be listening to music, someone really listened to you and you felt seen and understood. It can be being extremely ill. This is something that also kind of was a repeated theme. Significant messages from song or external manifestations, such as, again, nature or reading a book and something really resonated. And it can also be social encounters and interactions. Again, just a very brief example. I remember waking up sweating for a dream. In my dream, I hear my mother telling me a name of someone who passed away. It's a relative that I hadn't been in contact with for years, and she said his name in my dream. I woke up sweating and then returned to sleep. A few hours later, at 6 a.m., I get a call that this very man passed away during the night. I was shocked. So in a way, again, some kind of causal occurrence that really echoes internal, in this case a dream, internal state and external state. And the last one, the last building block is of course meaning detecting. I'm calling that meaning detecting and not meaning making, because it's really seeking for it, listening to the message or the meaning within it. And this is about connecting the dots. Of course, it's very personal. Not any event, external event, can be meaningful in the same way to the same person or other persons. But by connecting these coincidental events to their personal narratives and histories, participants felt that their lives were guided and directed in a way and unfolds the journey with yet unforeseen paths. They felt as part of a greater whole, something much greater than their own self journey. Again, some, for me, beautiful voices of these participants. If you notice, you get a small window, a glimpse into a greater stream of things. It's like you are plugging into a hidden network that connects people, places, and events. For example, if you take a little distance, you realize that this chair is not a standalone phenomenon. It is also connected to a table and the floor. Another example, when there is such an intersection between listening to yourself, really listening, and some higher order of the world, the universe, it's like removing layers of dust and seeing things as they are. It calls you to figure out the message, look for the meaning it has to convey. So this model, again, attentive model, still work in progress, really kind of highlights the three building blocks. The first one, receptiveness, is about attention, paying attention, being open-minded to the world, being in a dialogue with the world. And also, of course, intention. This is the intention to be open. Which kind of course, it's a process, it's a spiral process, but which kind of opens the way, paves the way for emotion-evoking experience that had three main characteristics, this event. The first one is a proper timing, as we've heard from some of the examples here, a correspondence. At the exact timing that I felt or that I thought about something, I saw that coming in some way, I got a message. The second one is memorability. There are vivid experiences, they are memorable. People, it's like something that really kind of stays with you, sometimes for years. And of course, the third one is emotional intensity. This is something, especially due to the surprise in it, something that's very intense in terms of emotion. And the last one is meaning detecting, as I mentioned. The outcomes that we identified, also three main outcomes. The first one is positive emotions. Those people felt alive. They felt they're a part of something greater than themselves. Enthusiasm, gratefulness. We also identify a sense of coherence. Again, paradoxically, these kind of threats to coherence led to more coherent. We feel that the world makes sense. And the third one is about self-direction and purpose, following up on the beautiful lecture that Mick gave just before me. A sense of being directed. I have a purpose. The things that are happening are not senseless. So, I just want to review very quickly these outcomes. So, the enhancement of positive emotions, specifically alignment and connection, vitality, engagement in life. Some participants reported self-transcendence as something that is resulting for these experiences. Enhanced sense of coherence and comprehensibility, which we know it's an essential ingredient of meaning. A feeling that experiences and events are not random or arbitrary, but carry some significance, personal significance and broader significance. The third one is the emerging reassurance that one is guided and progressing in the right direction. Sometimes it helped them to decide, facing a decision they had to make. career decision, relational decision. Sometimes it's an encouragement that you're in the right direction. Sometimes it's the other way around, warning. So it's granting a sense of purpose. So in a way, as I mentioned earlier, paradoxically, these sudden chance encounters that are really arbitrary and random yielded a sense of interconnectedness. And this Jung really offered a systematic way of, holistic way of looking at things as something that really is interconnected in our reality, which he felt is neglected. Again, as Mick mentioned, in some therapies, we really neglect this idea of interconnectedness. And I think as clinicians, as therapists, as counselors, as educators, as human beings, we cannot live or neglect some part of ourselves and put that aside. I think that's our responsibility, at least to be open to these kind of experiences of our clients. So just very few highlights that I want to make in terms of wrapping these ideas up. The first one is about the first building block, the receptiveness. And I really like this quote by Coleman, who is one of the followers of Jung's work. He says, coincidences are there waiting to happen for those who attend to them. So as we know from different theories like mindfulness, like the Big Five, openness to experience, and from the career development theory of planned happenstance that I mentioned before, being open, being receptive, being attentive to external environment really enables us a learning mode, kind of an openness to the possibility and probability of detecting more of such moments and experiences. And this study, this very initial explorative study, contributed in a way that we didn't just identify the characteristics of the experience, and another related shared dimension was memorability. And we know from some research done around hedonic adaptation, I'm sure you know that, we get used to everything, right, after some period of time. We know that one thing that really enables us not to get used to things is surprise, right? Trying to really surprise ourselves and do something differently from the way you usually do. So this was some element that was unexpected unfolding of these events, which really contradicted rational causality sequences. Oh my, okay. So, just very briefly, although the experiences really shared something very universal and human, all of them spoke about human experience, very shared for all of them. But what we did identify, there were, in the interpretation, there were different interpretations. Just like we see here, but this is part of, if you know Zoom, if you zoom out, you see this is a part of a much greater context. So for example, religious participants really refer to explaining these kind of experiences as being a part of a greater scheme of things, under God's providence, for example, while secular participants really refer that or attributed that to their reflection and agency as persons. So the background of the story, or the way we connect those dots, of course, is related to our own personal narratives and histories. So going back to the beautiful, again, I think visual that you gave us, Amy, before about weaving things together. So these perceived discrepancies between overall and situational meaning provoke these efforts to rebuild meaningful links as a spontaneous day-to-day, not just when meaning is broken due to adversity or trauma, but as a day-to-day spontaneous natural process. And this awareness, of course, enables us to connect the dot in a very broadened way, and to enables us to further open our horizon, which I call it learned meaningfulness, right? We have learned helplessness, we have learned optimism, and I think we can learn through that, being open to create more and understand more and see more meaning in our everyday lives, instead of just ignoring or rejecting unexpected triggers or discrepancies. So of course, this study have limitations. One of the dangers is, of course, over-interpreting everything. I think we're not there yet. But this is, of course, highlights the importance of continuing to explore this rather neglected area of meaning making, meaning detecting, learning more about that. So there are, of course, many open questions. For example, who are the individuals who experience synchronicity? What individual developmental, maybe in some ages it is easier or more challenging to identify or be in contact with these kind of experiences. Social, cultural differences. Which capabilities may foster such experiences? What are the possible mental and physical benefits of synchronicity? Can people learn to be sensitive to external events that carry or hold meaning cues for them? Can we, and this is something we're working on now, creating experimental studies to try to understand how can we develop this kind of sensitivity. And of course it has many implications for education, relationships, psychotherapy, decision making, careers of course. And I'm sure you have much more ideas and other open questions that needs to be explored in this rather, again, something that we haven't been really fully exploring until, I hope now. So I want to leave you with this beautiful quote by Albert Einstein. He said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious." I'm ending. "It is the source of all true art and science." I think as scientists, as practitioners, we need to be humble in the things of knowing we don't know. And being able to be curious about this kind of idea of mystery and really listen to people and their special or casual or uncasual experiences may broaden our perspective about meaning. So thank you for listening. I would love to hear your thoughts if you have any ideas, and thank you for listening.